On Thanksgiving Day, I pulled into my daughter's neighborhood unannounced, my old Ford F-150 humming low against the falling snow. As I slowed near her driveway, the sight that greeted me froze me harder than the 15-degree wind ever could. My grandson Ethan sat hunched on the front steps, shivering violently in nothing but a thin t-shirt and shorts. His arms wrapped around his knees, lips tinged blue, while inside the house, warm light spilled across frosted windows. Through the glass, I could make out shadows moving around a table, the muffled sound of laughter, the clink of silverware against plates. A family feast, except one member was left to freeze outside like trash. Rage welled up in me, sharp and unstoppable. By the time I reached him, snow stung my face like needles. Ethan tried to speak, his teeth clattering too hard for words. I threw my heavy coat around his shoulders and pulled him into my arms, feeling just how ice-cold his body had become. My gut twisted as the truth settled in. This wasn't an accident. Derek Lawson had done this. But storming the door would come later. That moment was about saving the boy. I guided him into my truck, blasting the heater and wrapping him in the emergency blanket Helen had packed years ago. She'd always thought ahead, God bless her. Watching his hands tremble in mine, I couldn't shake the guilt. 6 months had passed since Helen's death, and without her steady presence, maybe I'd ignored signs I should have caught. The bruise I'd seen on Ethan's arm during our summer fishing trip at Lake Erie. His excuses that sounded too practiced, too precise. Helen would have known right away. She always did. Earlier that afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself this would be a normal holiday. My neighbor had texted about police cars over at the Hendersons' place again. Another domestic call. It reminded me of Caroline's marriage, how often that gnawing worry sat heavy in my gut. I should have trusted it. The plan had been simple. Surprise the family, bring gifts, maybe help bridge the cracks that had widened since Helen passed. 2 bags sat on the passenger seat, one with a pair of brand new sneakers, the other with a worn paperback of classic science fiction, the kind Ethan used to devour when he was younger. He was 18 now, preparing for college, talking about studying law someday. Maybe he thought he was too old for such things, but I remembered what Helen used to tell me. The true riches in life aren't what you own, but who you can hold close. Driving south on I-75 through a curtain of thickening snow, the radio crackled out an old Johnny Cash tune, every chord heavy as my own thoughts. I'd kept both hands steady on the wheel, reminding myself there was no point arriving if I ended up in a ditch. Exit signs ticked down the miles toward Caroline's house in Columbus. I'd tried calling ahead, but no one answered. Odd for Thanksgiving afternoon. A pit stop at a gas station had bought me coffee and peppermints Ethan liked, plus a warning from the clerk about wrecks along the highway. By the time I rolled into Maple Grove subdivision, it was 3:15. The houses there looked like postcards, pumpkins and autumn wreaths still clinging to porches, Christmas lights already glinting under snowy branches, golden rectangles of warmth spilled from window after window, families gathered safe inside, laughter, comfort, togetherness. And at the end of the block stood Caroline's blue 2-story house, white shutters gleaming, Derek's black Chevy Silverado parked beside her silver Camry. Smoke curled from the chimney, holiday decorations lined the porch, and everything looked normal. Peaceful, even. For one fleeting second, I imagined knocking on the door, hearing my daughter's surprised laugh, feeling Ethan's hug as he ran to greet me like he had when he was smaller. Maybe this year could have been different. Maybe Helen's dream of a healed family could have lived. But that was before I saw Ethan shivering alone in the snow. His eyes lifted, and the raw relief I saw nearly broke me. "Grandpa," he whispered. His voice cracked, teeth chattering so hard the word was almost lost. I was already pulling my heavy winter coat from my shoulders, wrapping it around him before he could finish. His body felt like ice beneath my hands, trembling violently like a leaf caught in a storm. "What do you mean you can't?" I asked, steadying him when his legs buckled. "Can't what?" He clung to my coat, his hands shaking even through the thick fabric. "They said I don't get to go back inside." The words hit me like a hammer. From inside, through glowing windows, I could hear the laughter of guests, the muffled sound of a football game on TV, the glow of family celebration while my grandson sat outside, freezing like an unwanted stray. "What do you mean, not allowed?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. Anger was rising fast, hot in my chest. "This is your home." Ethan flinched at my tone. Immediately I softened it. The last thing the boy needed was another man yelling at him. "Please don't make it worse for me," he whispered, eyes flicking nervously to the front door. "Please, Grandpa, if Derek hears you—" I turned to stare at the house, the decorations, the golden light spilling across snow, the sounds of warmth and plenty, then back to my grandson, lips blue, body trembling. A boy in clothes that wouldn't be enough for 50-degree weather, let alone 15. "How long, son?" I asked quietly but firmly. "How long have you been out here?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. Since this morning." I checked my watch. A little after 3, my blood went cold in a way the winter air never could. "Ethan," I whispered, fighting to keep calm, "it's below freezing. Hours out here, you could have—" I cut myself off before I scared him worse. I tried the front door handle. Locked. Of course it was. They had locked him out of his own home on Thanksgiving Day. "Come on," I said, my voice low and steady, guiding him toward the truck. "Let's get you in the cab. Get you warm." Even as I moved to protect him, my mind was cataloguing. The flinch when I raised my voice. The bruise I'd noticed last summer, too precise to be from a fall. The careful way he moved, like someone who had learned to make himself small to avoid notice. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. I settled him in the passenger seat, cranked the heat to maximum, and wrapped another blanket from my emergency kit over his shoulders. His hands were stiff, useless with cold, so I held them between mine, rubbing to bring life back into his fingers. "Talk to me, son," I said, forcing my voice steady even as rage boiled beneath. "What happened today?" He stared down at his hands. "I was helping Mom with the turkey. She asked me to keep an eye on it while she got ready." His voice was tiny, ashamed. "I forgot to check the timer and the skin on top burned a little. Not ruined, just darker." When his eyes finally met mine, they were full of fear. "Derek came in and saw it," he whispered, "and he went off on me." My jaw tightened. "Went off how?" "Started yelling. Said I ruined the whole holiday. Said the guests would think Mom couldn't cook, that I embarrassed the family." Ethan pulled the blanket tighter, curling in on himself. "Then he said I needed to think about my actions, and I couldn't come back inside until I'd learned responsibility." My fists clenched so hard my knuckles popped. "And your mother." The words came out harder than I intended. Ethan swallowed, looked away. She tried to speak up, but Derek shut her down in front of everyone. Told her this was his call, not hers. His voice cracked, so small I almost missed it. She didn't say anything after that. I checked my watch. 3:20. My voice stayed calm, though my blood boiled beneath. "Ethan, what time did this happen?" He stared down, ashamed. "Around 11 this morning. 4.5 hours in weather that could kill a grown man over a slightly burnt turkey that probably tasted just fine." I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, so I didn't roar with rage. "Has this happened before?" The question hung in the cab. I could see him struggling, weighing the danger of honesty against the desperate relief of finally telling the truth. "Sometimes," he whispered, "when I mess up. Last month he made me stand in the garage all night because I forgot to take out the trash. And once—" He hesitated, swallowing hard. "Once he locked me in the basement for 2 days because I broke one of his beer bottles." Each word felt like a punch to my gut. I looked at my grandson, smart, kind, gentle, and saw how he held himself, careful and small, like someone who had learned that existing in plain sight was dangerous. "Your mother knows about this?" I asked quietly. Ethan's face twisted. She says Derek's just trying to teach me discipline. That I need to be more responsible. His voice cracked, and the doubt in his tone hit me harder than the cold. Maybe she's right. Maybe I really am just... Stop! I turned fully toward him, my voice low but sharp. Don't you ever put this on yourself. What that man is doing to you isn't teaching, it's cruelty, and it ends tonight. Ethan's eyes went wide, panic rushing across his face. No, Grandpa, please. If you stand up to him, he'll just find another way to punish me. He always does. Through the windshield, the house glowed golden, laughter spilling into the dark, a perfect holiday portrait, while my grandson sat outside, treated like an intruder in his own home. Listen to me. I clasped his frozen hands, rubbing warmth back into them. You're 18 now. You don't have to endure this another day, and I'll be damned if I let you. But where would I go? His voice broke on the words. I don't have money. College isn't even possible without... You're coming with me. Tonight. The decision hardened as I spoke it aloud. We'll figure the rest out later. His eyes flickered, torn between terror and something brighter. Hope. The fragile kind, afraid to believe in rescue. He won't let me leave, Ethan whispered. He'll make up some lie, call the cops, say I stole from him, say you kidnapped me. I looked at the house again, the wreaths, the warm lights, the muffled music, a facade of happiness wrapped around rot. And in my chest, something colder than the snow settled, heavy and immovable. Helen had always been the peacemaker, smoothing sharp edges, patching cracks with patience. But Helen was gone, and her gentleness hadn't kept my grandson from being left to freeze on a holiday. Let me handle Derek, I said, pushing the door open. Right now, we're getting your things. Snow crunched under my boots as I stepped into the bitter air. Ethan scrambled after me, still cocooned in my coat. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the fury that had been building for years, finally finding its target. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked as we neared the porch. In the half-light I saw them, faint bruises along his jaw, half hidden by the red flush of cold. I tried, he whispered, clutching the coat tighter. But every time I said something, Mom, she'd shut it down. The memory hit me like a steel trap snapping shut. Last month he'd called while I stirred a pot on the stove. His voice had been small, brittle. Grandpa, Derek says I can't sit at the table anymore. Says I have to earn my place. I chuckled then, foolishly brushing it off as teenage sulking. When I asked Caroline about it, she dismissed it with a sigh, that same weary tone she'd adopted since marrying him. Dad, you're overreacting. It's just discipline. Ethan exaggerates. Teenagers always do. Another memory cut through. Last summer's call. Ethan, voice hoarse from exhaustion. Derek made me scrub every dish in the house because I left one dirty. Twice. How long has this been going on? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would tear me apart. His eyes dropped to his lap. His reply was barely a breath. Since Mom married him, 3 years. It started with little things, redoing chores. Then it turned into... worse. I remembered that fishing trip, the way he stalled, begging to stay another day. How quiet he'd gone when I said it was time to head back. Back then, I thought he just loved the lake. Now I knew the truth. He hadn't wanted to set foot in that house again. And counting wouldn't help Ethan. I stood, still keeping him wrapped in my coat. Come on, we're going inside. Grandpa, no. Please, if you make a scene, he'll just what? My voice sharpened. Make you sleep outside again? Beat you? Starve you? Ethan's eyes darted toward the front door, terror in them. You don't understand how he gets when someone challenges him. But I was already moving, my grandson trailing reluctantly behind. The front door loomed, solid and expensive, Derek's pride, a monument to his false authority. I didn't knock. My boot hit just beside the lock with every ounce of strength I had left in me. 68 years old, but decades of factory work had left me harder than most men half my age. The wood splintered with a sharp crack, the door slamming open so hard it bounced against the wall. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of roasted turkey, colliding with the sound of shocked silence. I stepped inside, Ethan close behind. The dining room was a picture from a magazine. White tablecloth, candles flickering, crystal glasses gleaming. Derek sat at the head of the table in a crisp button-down, carving knife in hand. Caroline was beside him in a green dress I'd never seen before, her hair perfectly styled, eyes wide with shock. At the far end sat little Chloe, maybe 10, a forkful of mashed potatoes frozen halfway to her mouth. They looked like a family portrait. Paused mid-motion, the contrast hit me like a hammer, warm and comfortable inside, feasting like royalty, while Ethan had been shivering outside since late morning. Nearly 5 hours. The turkey sat golden, flawless. Probably a replacement for the casserole Derek had claimed Ethan ruined. "Have you completely lost your minds?" My voice roared through the room, shaking the chandelier. Chloe dropped her fork with a clatter. Caroline's face went white as paper. The spoon in her hand fell, splattering gravy across the pristine tablecloth. "Dad!" Caroline's voice cracked. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "While you sit here feasting," I bellowed, pointing to Ethan still trembling beneath my coat. "That boy was freezing outside. 5 hours, Caroline. 5 hours in weather that could have killed him." Derek calmly set down the carving knife and rose from his chair. He was larger than I remembered, easily 50 pounds heavier than me, but I'd been in enough fights to know size didn't always matter. Not when you were angry enough. "Who gave you permission to enter my house?" His voice was low, controlled, but dangerous, the kind of tone men use when they're used to ruling their domain without challenge. "This is private property," he continued, moving around the table toward me with predatory confidence. "You're trespassing!" I could see him sizing me up, calculating whether intimidation would be enough to send me backing down. "Private property?" I stepped forward to meet him, my own voice steady and hard. "You mean the property where you locked my grandson outside to freeze while you ate dinner?" Behind him, Chloe began to cry, frightened by the shouting. Caroline reached out instinctively to comfort her, but her eyes never left mine. I could see the conflict tearing her apart, caught between protecting her son and defending her husband. "This is a private family matter," Derek said, his voice rising with practiced authority. "You have no business here." "No business?" I snapped, heat burning in my chest. "That's my grandson you nearly killed with your so-called family matter." Behind me, Ethan pressed closer. I could feel him trembling, not just from the cold, but from the fear of what was about to happen. This was probably the first time anyone had ever stood up to Derek in his own home, and we all knew it was about to turn ugly. The holiday music still played softly in the background, some cheerful tune about gratitude and togetherness. The irony was unbearable. I pointed directly at Ethan, my finger steady despite the rage burning in me. "Look at him, Derek. Really look at what you've done." Derek crossed his arms, chin tilted high, wearing the smug expression of a man convinced of his own authority. "The boy ruined our holiday," he said flatly. "He had to learn there are consequences." "Consequences?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "You left him outside for nearly 5 hours in weather that could kill a grown man over a casserole that came out a little too dark." "He's 18, Derek snapped back, "not some fragile child. And this is my house, my rules. Someone had to teach him discipline, something his mother clearly never managed." Caroline flinched at the jab, but stayed silent, frozen in her chair. Her hand rested on Chloe's shoulder, but her eyes stayed locked on me, torn between fear, shame, and something else rising behind them. "Discipline," I repeated, stepping closer to the table, close enough to see the grease on Derek's plate and the wine stain on his lips. "That's called abuse, and you're lucky I don't call the police right now." "Child abuse?" Derek laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. He forgot to turn off a timer and ruined a $20 turkey. I sent him outside to think about his actions. That's not abuse, that's parenting. For 4 hours, in 5-degree weather. He's exaggerating as usual, Derek said, waving his hand like he was shooing away a fly. Look at him, he's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone. I looked at Ethan, still wrapped in my coat, lips blue, his whole body shaking violently. Fine. Derek thought hypothermia was fine. Dad, please! Caroline's voice finally broke the silence, shaky and thin. Don't ruin our holiday. We can talk about this later as a family. Ruin your holiday? I turned on her, my voice sharp. Your son was sitting outside freezing to death while you ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday. She lowered her gaze to her plate, unable to meet my eyes. Derek was just trying to teach Ethan responsibility. Sometimes boys need firm guidance. Firm guidance. My voice shook with disbelief. Caroline, when you dented my truck at 18, did I lock you outside in a blizzard? When you failed that math test, did I make you sleep in the garage? That's different, she whispered. How? I pressed. How is it different? Derek stepped between us, face red with anger. Because this is my house, and Ethan isn't my biological son. I have every right to discipline him as I see fit. There it was, the truth. Ethan wasn't his blood, so Ethan didn't matter. My grandson was nothing more than an inconvenience to be punished and controlled. You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet. 30 seconds to show some shred of human decency. Derek laughed again, colder this time. I don't owe that boy anything. If he doesn't like my rules, he can find somewhere else to live. Chloe cried harder, Caroline trying to hush her, but I barely noticed. All I saw was Derek's smug face. All I could think about was Ethan shivering outside for 4 hours, believing he deserved it. Somewhere else to live? I stepped closer. Close enough to smell the wine on Derek's breath. You're right about that. He is going somewhere else. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad. The movement was slow, deliberate, enough for everyone to understand exactly what I was considering. Derek's expression shifted when he saw the phone. His smug confidence cracked just slightly around the edges. Either you apologize to my grandson right now, I said, voice steady and calm, or I call Child Protective Services and report this abuse. You wouldn't dare, Derek sneered, stepping closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me, but I'd faced bigger men than him in my life, and I wasn't about to back down from anyone who hurt my family. Try me, I said, beginning to dial. I've got plenty to tell them about how you left an 18-year-old outside in freezing weather for 4 hours. Behind me, Ethan gripped my arm. I could feel him trembling, but not from the cold anymore. This was a different kind of fear. The kind born from years of knowing that standing up only made things worse. Dad, please! Caroline finally moved, stepping between us with her hands raised like she was trying to break up a fight. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Derek. He did that when he decided to abuse my grandson. Abuse? Derek barked out a harsh, bitter laugh. I was teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never managed to do. Caroline flinched at that, as if he'd slapped her across the face. But she didn't defend herself. She just stood there, frozen, the way I suspected she always did when Derek tore her down. Get out of my house, old man, Derek continued, his voice rising. You have no authority here. Ethan is my responsibility now. Your responsibility? I swept my eyes around the pristine dining room, the crystal glasses, the fine china, the carefully arranged centerpiece, and then back to Ethan's bruised face. Is this how you handle responsibility? By locking a young man outside to freeze? Chloe sobbed harder, frightened and confused by all the shouting. Caroline pulled her close, but her eyes kept flicking between Derek and me, like she was watching a tennis match where one wrong move could end in disaster. He's not a child. He's 18, Derek snapped, straightening his shoulders. And in my house, adults who can't follow simple instructions face... Adult consequences, I repeated, my voice dripping with disgust. For forgetting a timer? For slightly burning a turkey? For being careless? For embarrassing us in front of our guests? For ruining our holiday? Derek gestured toward the empty chairs around the table, where other family members had clearly been before I arrived. I looked at those chairs, at the untouched wine glasses and half-eaten dishes. Guests had been here, eating, socializing, while Ethan sat outside, freezing. Not one of them questioned it. Not one said a word. "Grandpa, let's just go," Ethan whispered behind me, his voice so small it broke something inside me. "Please, I don't want to cause more problems." That defeat in his tone cut deeper than anything Derek had said. This boy, my grandson, had been beaten down so completely that he thought he was the problem, just for asking for basic decency. "You're not causing problems, son," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You never were." I turned back to Derek, my decision crystallizing like ice in my veins. "You have 30 seconds to apologize to my grandson for what you did today." "I'm not apologizing for anything," Derek said, crossing his arms with smug defiance. "And I'm sure as hell not taking orders from some bitter old man who can't accept that his precious grandson needed discipline." "Then we're done here." I slipped my phone back into my pocket and put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Go get your things, son. You're coming home with me." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Chloe stopped crying. "You can't just take him," Carolyn whispered, her voice breaking. "Watch me." I guided Ethan away from the dining room and toward the stairs. "Go pack whatever you need. We're leaving." "Dad, you can't do this." Carolyn followed us, her voice rising in panic. "You can't just walk into my house and take my son." "And I am." I kept my body between Ethan and the rest of the family. "Unless you'd rather I call the authorities and let them sort it out." Ethan led the way up the narrow staircase, his steps quick and uncertain. Derek's heavy footsteps followed close behind, but I didn't turn around. "This is kidnapping," Derek shouted. "I'll have you arrested for kidnapping." "Good luck explaining to the police why my grandson was sitting outside in 5-degree weather for 4 hours, I shot back. We reached the top of the stairs, and Ethan led me down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It was barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser, no heating vent in sight, and the single north-facing window leaked cold air. It looked more like a storage closet than a bedroom, the worst room in the house by far. "This is where you sleep?" I asked, my stomach twisting. Ethan nodded, already pulling clothes from the dresser and stuffing them into a duffel bag. "Derek says the basement room is for guests, and the other upstairs bedroom is for Chloe." I noticed he didn't call her our sister, just my sister. Even here in his own home, Ethan was an outsider. "Take everything that matters to you," I said, planting myself in the doorway like a guard. "We're not coming back for anything." "Ethan, think about what you're doing." Caroline appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "This is your home, your family." "Some family," Ethan muttered, folding a University of Cincinnati sweatshirt into his bag. "Real families don't lock each other outside to freeze. Derek was just trying to teach me responsibility by giving me hypothermia." He looked up at his mother, and I could see 3 years of hurt and disappointment burning in his eyes. "Mom, he made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a glass in the sink." "A glass?" Caroline's face crumpled. "That's not normal." "He has high standards," she whispered weakly. "He wants you to be better." "He wants me gone," Ethan said quietly, zipping up his bag. "And you know it." We made our way back downstairs, Derek waiting at the bottom like a bouncer. "You leave my house, boy," Derek growled, his broad frame blocking the way. "And you don't come back. Ever." "Fine by me," Ethan said, and for the first time all day, I heard real strength in his voice. The front door still hung open from when I'd kicked it in, cold air flooding inside and making the holiday decorations flutter like dying leaves. My truck was visible in the driveway, exhaust curling into the icy evening air. "Ethan!" Caroline called desperately as we reached the doorway. "Please, don't do this! I love you!" Ethan stopped, turning to look at her one last time. His voice was steady. "If you loved me, Mom, you wouldn't have let this happen." We walked to my truck in silence, our breath steaming in the frozen air. I threw his bag into the bed and helped him climb into the passenger seat. Through the window of the house, I saw them still standing there. Caroline crying, Derek red-faced with rage, Chloe peeking around the corner with wide, frightened eyes. "You ready?" I asked, sliding into the driver's seat. "I've been ready for 3 years," Ethan said, pulling my coat tighter around his shoulders, like it was the only shield he had left in the world. I backed out of the driveway and steered onto the street. Other houses glowed with soft light and holiday cheer, families finishing their Thanksgiving dinners in peace, oblivious to the storm that had torn through ours. The radio still hummed with classic rock. The heater roared against the cold. And for the first time all day, Ethan's chest lifted like he could finally take a full breath. "Thank you, Grandpa," he said, voice rough but steady, as we turned toward the highway. "I can't believe you actually came for me." "I should have come sooner," I admitted, every syllable heavy with regret. "I should have seen what was happening long before today." "I tried to tell you," Ethan whispered, his gaze dropping to his hands. "But I didn't know how. I didn't think anyone would listen." Silence settled in, broken only by the tires humming against frozen asphalt. The familiar weight of responsibility wrapped itself around my shoulders like Helen's favorite quilt. This boy wasn't just my grandson. He was someone who needed shelter, healing, and a chance to grow into the man he was meant to be. "Tell me about college," I said at last, merging onto I-75 North. "What's the dream, son?" "Pre-law," Ethan said, and his voice grew firmer with each word. "Political science first, then law school. I want the University of Cincinnati." I smiled, the ache of missing Helen deep in my chest. She would have been proud beyond words. "We'll figure out tuition," I promised. "Don't waste a second worrying about that." "Grandpa, I don't want to be a burden." "Son," I said, turning to meet his eyes with all the conviction I had, "you are not a burden. You're family, and family takes care of its own." By the time we pulled into my driveway, night had fallen hard. The house seemed to glow like it was waiting for us. The porch light I'd left on out of habit now shone like a beacon cutting through the black. "Home, sweet home," I said, helping Ethan carry his bag to the door. The key slid smoothly into the lock. Warmth poured out as the door swung open, carrying the smell of fresh coffee and the faint lavender Helen had loved. The house was modest, worn carpets, old furniture, but it was safe, and more importantly, it was ours. "You remember the guest room?" I asked, flicking on the lights as we stepped in. "Down the hall next to your room." He looked around with relief, so raw it made my throat tighten. "It's so warm in here." "Thermostat's always at 72, I said with a small smile. "Your grandmother used to say life's too short to be cold in your own house." I led him to the guest room. The space was simple, but welcoming. A double bed under one of Helen's handmade quilts, a dresser, a chair by the window. Family photos lined the walls. Ethan, at different ages, grinning like the world still made sense. This had always been his room when he visited. Seeing him here now felt right in a way nothing had since Helen passed. "I'll start dinner," I said. "Nothing fancy, just chicken from the freezer and a few vegetables that need using up." "Can I help?" he asked quickly, desperation in his eyes. He wanted to show he belonged, that he wasn't just another problem dumped on me. "Of course," I said warmly. "But don't feel like you owe me anything. This is your home now. Not a job." We moved around the kitchen together, our rhythm quiet but sure. Slowly I saw the tension bleed out of his shoulders. "I want to stay with my grandpa," Ethan said suddenly, his voice steady despite the blanket still draped over him. Derek's face flushed crimson. "See? He's poisoning the boy against his own family, filling his head with lies." "What lies?" I snapped, stepping forward. The truth that you left him in sub-freezing weather for 4 hours. The truth that you've been abusing him for 3 years, while everyone looked the other way. Abuse? Derek barked out a laugh. But it was thin, brittle, the kind of laugh used to cover fear. I was teaching him responsibility. The boy ruined Thanksgiving dinner. He had to learn there are consequences. The first officer, a stocky man with weary eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Burke," he said, pulling out his notebook, "we need everyone calm. Let's get the facts straight. Please, step inside." I stepped back, allowing them in, though rage burned under my skin. Derek marched in like he owned the room, puffed up with false authority. Caroline trailed after, her eyes locked on the floor, like a woman who had forgotten how to look anyone in the eye. "Now then," Officer Blake said, pulling out his notepad, "let's start from the beginning. Mr. Lawson, you claim this man kidnapped your stepson." "Absolutely." Derek straightened his shoulders, putting on his practiced mask of reason. "I came home from work to find my front door broken and Ethan gone. Neighbors said they saw an older man forcing him into a truck." "Forcing?" I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "Officer, I rescued my grandson from child abuse." "That's what he keeps saying," Derek interrupted smoothly, shaking his head with mock pity. "But the truth is, he's never approved of my marriage to Caroline. He's been looking for any excuse to cause trouble." The officer turned to Ethan, who still stood close enough for me to feel him trembling. "Son, did this man force you to come with him?" "No, sir," Ethan said, his voice clear now. "He saved me." "Saved you from what?" Ethan glanced nervously at Derek, then back at the officer. "From freezing to death on the front porch." Officer Blake raised his eyes from his notepad. "Explain that." "I accidentally burned the turkey this morning. Derek made me sit outside in the cold to think about my actions. I was out there for more than 4 hours in 15-degree weather." "He's exaggerating," Derek said quickly, his confidence starting to crack. "It was maybe an hour, and he was dressed warmly." "An hour?" I snapped. "Officer, I have witnesses." "My grandson was sitting on that porch in a thin shirt and jeans when I arrived at 3:15. He told me Derek put him out there just after 11 and left him until I showed up." Now, Officer Ramirez looked at Derek with new interest. "Sir, is it true you made the young man sit outside as punishment?" "Briefly, yes, but he's making it sound worse than it was." Derek's facade was slipping. "Look, sometimes teenagers need firm discipline. His mother and I agreed. Mom didn't agree to anything," Ethan cut in, his voice stronger now. "She just didn't stop you." All eyes turned to Caroline, who stood by the doorway with her hands clasped tightly in front of her like she might collapse. "Ma'am," Officer Blake prompted gently, "what's your version of events?" Caroline looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that whatever she said next would decide everything. Her eyes flicked between Derek's threatening glare and Ethan's desperate hope. "Mrs. Lawson," Ramirez said softly, "we need the truth." Derek shifted closer, looming over her, his eyes cold with warning. "Tell them how your father has been poisoning Ethan against our family." "Sir, step back and let her speak for herself," Blake ordered firmly. Caroline's voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Ethan did burn the turkey this morning, and Derek was very upset. He said Ethan needed to learn responsibility by sitting outside in the freezing cold." Her words faltered. "He told me it would teach him to be more careful." "How long was he outside, ma'am?" Her hands trembled. "Since just after 11 in the morning, and only came in when my father arrived, after 3 o'clock. The officers did the math silently. Over 4 hours, in 15-degree weather. "He's making it sound worse than it was," Derek blurted, his face reddening. "The boy could have come inside any time if he'd apologized and shown some remorse." "No, he couldn't," Caroline said suddenly, her voice breaking through the silence. Her eyes brimmed with tears as she looked at Derek. "Because you locked the door. You told me not to let him in, no matter what." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's face went pale, then flushed crimson. His mask cracked completely. "Caroline," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any idea what you're doing?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice steady. "For once, I'm telling the truth." "Caroline," Derek said, his voice dangerously quiet. "What are you doing?" "I'm telling the truth." She looked at Ethan, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. "For once in 3 years, I'm telling the truth." Officer Ramirez leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Lawson, has this kind of punishment happened before?" "Yes." The word burst out of her like it had been trapped for years. "He's forced Ethan to sleep in the garage, in the basement. He's left him outside overnight in the middle of winter. He controls when Ethan can eat, when he can shower, even when he's allowed to speak at the dinner table." "Caroline, shut up." Derek's mask slipped completely. His voice shook with rage. "You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy everything we've built." "What we've built?" She turned on him with sudden fury. "What have we built except fear and misery? Look at my son. Look what you've done to him." I watched Ethan's face transform as his mother finally stood up for him. 3 years of doubt and self-blame seemed to melt away as he realized someone else could finally see the truth of what he had endured. Officer Blake stepped forward, pulling out his cuffs. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous," Derek barked, backing toward the door. "You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old man and his delusional daughter. Based on physical evidence and multiple corroborating testimonies about child endangerment," Blake said calmly. "You have the right to remain silent." As they read Derek his rights and led him toward the door, he turned back with venom in his eyes. "You'll regret this betrayal, Caroline. You'll lose everything. The house, the money, all of it. You'll be nothing without me." "I'd rather start from nothing than watch you hurt my son again," she said. And for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong woman who had raised Ethan on her own. The door closed behind the officers and their prisoner, leaving the 3 of us alone in my living room. Caroline collapsed into a chair and started crying, not the quiet, careful tears she had shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs from years of buried pain. Ethan went to her immediately, kneeling beside her. "Mom, it's okay. It's over now." "I'm so sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I should have protected you. I should have been stronger." "You were strong tonight," I said, settling back into my chair by the fireplace. "When it mattered most, you chose your son over your husband. That took real courage." The fire crackled steadily in the grate, and for the first time in months, my house felt like a home again, not just because my family was safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken and justice was finally done. Ethan looked up at me from where he knelt beside his mother's chair. "What happens now, Grandpa?" "Now we heal," I said simply. "We take our time, and we heal." 4 months later, the morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as Caroline flipped pancakes on the griddle, and Ethan sat at the table reviewing his acceptance letter from Ohio State University's pre-law program. "Full scholarship," he said for the 10th time that week, still not quite believing it. "They're actually paying me to go to school." "That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard," Caroline said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto his plate. She looked different now, stronger, more certain. A part-time job at the local library gave her her own independence, and the divorce settlement had been enough to let her finally breathe again. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. The kitchen felt alive in a way it hadn't since Helen passed, full of conversation, laughter, and the kind of easy chaos that belongs only to real families. Caroline had moved in permanently after Derek's conviction. The guest room had become hers, and we had turned the basement into a proper bedroom for Ethan, not a punishment cell, like at Derek's house, but a comfortable retreat with warmth, light, and space to dream. "Dad, are you sure you don't mind us staying here indefinitely?" Caroline asked, joining us at the table. I know you're used to your independence. Independence is overrated, I said, meaning every word. Family is what matters. Besides, who else is going to make sure Ethan doesn't burn down the kitchen when he tries to cook? That was one time, Ethan protested with a laugh, and the fire was very small. Caroline shook her head with a smile. For the first time, her laughter didn't sound forced. It was free, genuine. That afternoon, while Ethan was at guitar practice, Caroline and I worked in the garden, preparing the soil for Helen's old vegetable patch. Spring was coming early that year, and there was something healing about planting seeds in ground that had once seemed barren. "Dad," she said quietly as she pulled weeds, "thank you again for what you did. If you hadn't come that day—" Her voice broke. "You don't need to thank me," I said, pressing my hand into the soil. "I just did what any grandfather would do." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You risked everything to save him. You could have walked away, but you didn't." I didn't answer right away. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of turned earth, and I thought of Helen, what she would have said. Finally, I looked at Caroline. "Truth has a way of winning out. It always does." She gave me a small smile, wiping dirt from her hands. "Helen used to say that too." That evening we fell into our new routine. Dinner together, then whatever game show or movie happened to be on television. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, predictable, safe. Ethan sat in the corner with his guitar, strumming softly, while Caroline worked a crossword, and I read the paper. Small, ordinary things that felt like miracles after all we had endured. "Grandpa," Ethan said during a commercial break, setting down the guitar, "I've been thinking about changing my major." "From pre-law to what?" "Law," he said firmly. "I don't just want to study politics. I want to be a lawyer. I want to help kids who are going through what I went through. I want to fight for them the way you fought for me." I looked at him. This boy who had been so close to breaking, now sitting straighter, his eyes bright with purpose. Helen would have cried tears of pride, and for the first time in years, I felt like the future was not just possible, but waiting. "I want to fight for them in court," Ethan said, his voice steady, conviction burning in his eyes. A surge of pride so strong it nearly took my breath away filled my chest. This young man, who had every right to carry bitterness and anger, wanted instead to use his scars as a shield for others. "That's a fine goal," I said. "Your grandmother always believed the best way to heal from pain was to help others avoid it." "Did she really say that?" he asked, his voice softer. "She did, along with about 1,000 other pieces of wisdom I should have listened to more carefully," I admitted with a faint smile. As the evening wore on and Carolyn dozed in her chair, Ethan and I stepped out onto the back porch to look at the stars. The night was clear and sharp with cold, but nothing like that terrible Thanksgiving when I'd found him shivering on Derek's doorstep. "Ready for fishing season to open?" I asked. "Can't wait. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year? With your luck?" "Probably a whale," I teased. We stood in a long, comfortable silence. Two generations of Burke men who had found their way back to each other through crisis and truth. In a few months, Ethan would head off to Columbia University, and in time, he would build his own life, maybe even his own family. But the foundation was set now, built on honesty, protection, and the kind of love that never asks for anything in return. "Grandpa," Ethan said as we turned to head back inside. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not giving up on me, for reminding me I was worth saving." The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. 3 people who had learned the same lesson the hard way. That family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the ones who choose to stand beside you when it matters most, who tell the truth even when it's painful, and who protect the people they love no matter what the cost. Helen would have been proud of all of us. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it moved you, if it made you think about family, truth, or standing up for those you love, I'd be grateful if you showed your support. Subscribe to the channel, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Your presence here matters, and I hope you'll join me for the next story.